Okay, so let's just move to help us settle into riding horse. So remember that feeling that the legs, which include the hips, come up and grasp your spine at the min meng so that the sacrum and the coccyx can dangle down freely. So the sacrum's a strange bone because it's quite curved. And so it's sort of the top part, the hefty part of the sacrum, we want that to be vertical. The feeling is that the coccyx and the bottom of the sacrum is actually just trying to straighten out. But just under gravity. I mean, you can't really force it. I mean, there is flexibility there. So when, like, when a pregnant woman gives birth, basically that bone goes back a little bit to give room. And just think of the sacrum is like 5 bones that are fused. There's S1 to S5, and so we want, almost unfuse them in your mind at least, so that there's some flexibility within the sacrum. So the sacrum and the min meng are like the physical center. The min meng on the spine, between the bottom 2 lumbar vertebrae. And the dan qian is like the energetic center. Yeah, so they're talking now about the brain in your gut, the brain in your belly. So, they talk about gut feelings, so sort of intuitions and premonitions. So that all comes from here. Yeah. So there's a sense of there's more nerve endings in the gut than there are in the brain. And this processes a lot of information, especially a lot of prior information. So there's a sense that this feels before the event and this thinks after the event. Yeah. So for a martial artist, really, this is essential, which is why, most martial arts put the mind in the dan qian, because the dan qian is like the center of that brain. And that's mind in dan qian. In a sense, it all starts with that. And that's something you can have your mind on all day. Yeah. No matter what you're doing, you can have part of your mind with the dan qian. It's like a sobriety. Yeah. Then you don't get carried away. You retain your center. You don't get carried away with excitement or with fantasy excursions. Yeah, so if you go on a walk and you have your mind in the dan qian, then basically you're meditating. You're practicing. And we just want to really, through our own practice, through our own experience and awareness, to come to the realization that relaxing the sacrum and the coccyx and letting it pull down, allowing gravity to operate upon it all the time, that's the Tai Chi way of quietening the mind. Yeah. Ends of the spine correspond. Yeah. So by working on the bottom of the spine, you're also working on the top of the spine, the head. Yeah, so John, there's a famous Buddhist poem called Faith in Mind. And John always used to quote a couplet from it, which was to use the mind to work on the mind, how stupid can you get? Yeah. So it's just this, you know, you can't work on the mind directly. Yeah. You have to sort of direct your work somewhere else, and the mind will quieten as a byproduct. Yeah. And that's just pure meditation. I mean, when you're meditating, sitting down, cross-legged, then the spine is as vertical as it ever is, especially with Zen. You think of Zen, how stiff their necks are and straight their spines are, like ramrod straight. And they're the famous ones for quietening the mind. Yeah. So every spiritual discipline I've ever looked into always says the same thing. It all starts with quietening the mind, taming the mind. So they liken the mind to a monkey or a wild horse. Yeah? It's always running away. It's always fidgeting and mischievous, running away with itself. So to just bring it to some stillness. Okay, and now let's just lift. Okay. So this just requires you to get deeper into your posture. Otherwise, you'll just feel unbalanced, yeah? And also having a more sort of tactile relationship with the ground. Yeah? So the foot is coming off the ground, but then it wants to go back down. And as it goes back down, it really sinks into the ground and grabs. So there's a sense of going through the surface you're on. Yeah, so this is something you just can't think to yourself whilst you're doing, because otherwise you come up into the head and you just lose that sort of center of gravity, that low center of gravity, and you'll start wobbling. Yeah, so everything you're told by the teacher, you don't really believe. You have to find it out for yourself, yeah? And the only way to find it out for yourself is through experience, through practice, yeah? So in Zen, they say wisdom and realization is only achieved through your own solo practice. Yeah. Okay, and now let's just bring it to riding horse. So just feel the effect of that exercise. You should be a little bit lower into the riding horse than usual, because it really just opens up the joints here, the hips and the sacroiliacs, and you can just relax deeper. It's almost like your dantian drops a little bit from its usual place. And the energy down there is just so different than the energy up here. Yeah, it's much more the energy of sort of physical activity, whereas the energy up here is just of mental activity, really. This is why I can never understand why people sleep in beds. Yeah, it's, to me, to sleep on something that's raised from the ground just seems really dumb. Given that you could spend that 4 hours, in my case, with your head almost on the ground. Yeah. So we're relaxing. That pull of gravity is a continuum. It's continuous and it doesn't change. Yeah? So part of you is going with that, but also there's a part of you that has to let go. Yeah? And when you let go, it's almost like things spring open, and instantly you're in a state of slightly more heightened awareness where there's more spirit available. So things are sort of exciting and dangerous. That's what we would like to get to. We'd like the work to bring us out of normality and into the extraordinary. And the main release, once you've got a level of relaxation, is the sacrum and the sacroiliacs. It's like somehow the hips just have to spring apart, and then the sacrum can just sort of expand. That's the feeling. Okay, and now let's just breathe with it. So just a bit of qigong. So almost feel like you're not using the diaphragm. It's just these movements of the arms that's pulling the air in. And then it's squeezing the air out. So what you have to, it's almost like you have to be in two places at the same time. So what the Taoists say is that you're in the center, but you're also at the circumference. Yeah. So you're right in the thick of the action, but there's also part of you standing back, watching what's happening, observing. You're like in Vipassana, where you're just encouraged just to sort of have a mind that's just watching the thoughts arise and disappear, rather than trying to inhibit the thinking. And we'd just like to equalize those two minds, the mind at the center and the mind on the periphery. Which one feels more like you? It's normally the one on the outside, because we're used to being up here, which is outside anyway. And so the weak one, the one in the center, that's the one we really need to work on. Getting into the Dantian. And it's a different mind, yeah? So don't try putting your normal mind in the Dantian. Just have a concentration there. Yeah, so the Taoists called meditation, the Chinese term that it just translates as sitting in oblivion. Yeah. And so this real sort of, like that Christian cloud of unknowing. So the complete replacement of this mind with this mind. Yeah. It's just trying to just really relax into it so that you can extend the breath. Yeah, so you're breathing, but it's almost as though you're not. That's the feeling in meditation. Because you're aiming for like complete stillness, yeah. Yeah, so just feel the body. Yeah, so you are a living creature made of flesh and bone. So you are completely different than anything else in the room that you're in. Yeah, so we know that. So it just means we tend to sort of cut off from things. We create like a skin around ourselves to protect ourselves. So we want that to dissolve. So it's almost like you become impressionable. Yeah. So the ground beneath your feet is merging into your feet. You know, you feel the walls. So you become where you are. Especially, you know, when you're outside. This is why it's, you know, just so beneficial to practice, especially something like this, outside in nature. Yeah? Let's start bringing it into the belly a bit. So now just working on the min-main. So just trying to feel the min-main. Feel it squeeze back as you pull the belly in here. So we don't want this action to really affect the sacrum. The sacrum is still dangling. So because it will tend to send the sacrum back, it almost feels like you're pulling the sacrum under, but you're not really. You're just keeping it hanging. Whoa. Okay, so let's bring it back. So let's just try a few going into ward off. So just turning, like you're yielding, but then you just let the arm go out. It'll just take a natural path, you know, that's dependent upon the shape of the arm and also how relaxed you are. So you just turn. And you don't need to, I don't need to turn back to make this happen. I just keep turning and the arm will just naturally sneak round. And it's really, once it's in ward off, that's when I turn back to the front. And just feel the circle that you create. Feel the circumference, which is your body and the arm, and then feel the center where there's a hole. If you're yielding, then there's a hole at the center, almost like a light. And that's where the other would nestle. Yeah. Yeah? So just feel the arm. And so when we feel a limb, you normally feel the joints, yeah? So the arm is the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist. Yeah, so we feel the wrist. We know, when you talk about the arm and the hand, you think of the wrist, really. That's what you feel. But we also want to feel the elbow going out and the shoulder pulling out of its socket a little bit. And just most of all, just feel it relaxing the mind. If it's not doing that, then you're wasting your time, really. Because it won't be meditation. And then just bring the mind back to the sacrum. So just feel the turning about that central axis of the sacrum. That really has to stay unwobbling. It's really stable in its verticality. Because even the slightest wobble will tend to disperse the mind. And we want the mind to sort of gather and sort of concentrate. And just be careful that the largeness of your movements in the upper body doesn't pull you forwards, doesn't make the bum stick out. If even a millimeter is significant when it comes to the bum sticking out. And then just visualize the octopus, yeah. So it's like this arm that goes out, it's like a tentacle that's stretching. It's almost like there's no bones in it. So rather than being a jointed, articulated structure, it's more like a sort of boneless thing that just stretches and just makes its shape through muscle. Relaxed muscle, toned but relaxed. Because that's the sort of mind we need. A mind that is not based on perceptions and concepts, but just on energy, really, on shapelessness. That's the most difficult thing. Because our mind grasps for something it can latch onto. Okay, and now let's just bring it back. So this should be really quite big and swollen now. So now you really have to just concentrate on the dantian, because the heaviness here will tend to pull you forwards. Yeah. Yeah, and the arms, you know, they should hurt. You know, they feel heavy, and the openness that you're sustaining makes them ache. It's like a dull ache, yeah, rather than a sharp pain. So the more open they can be at the shoulder, yeah, the better. So what sort of positive mind do you need to maintain that expansion, that expanding? It's a continuous process of expanding, because if you don't keep it continuous, it will shrink. Yeah. As soon as you stop opening, you naturally close. As soon as you stop sinking, you naturally rise. Yeah. So we have to keep these things going. So the continuous mind, the continuous present. Okay. And now let's turn with it, yeah? So again, just feel the sacrum hanging. Just feel the real middle of the sacrum, the line that passes through it, and then just turn around it. And to start with, you'll wobble, and it will, you know, it will feel like the last thing you've got is this stable vertical line, but you know, it just takes a few rounds. So we just need to relax sufficiently so that our body can naturally just make all the micro adjustments that need to happen to accommodate a turn. Yeah, so it's like almost like you have to come to it fresh every time. Yeah, because when you know when you say turn, when you try and turn, effectively what you're doing is repeating an action that you've done before. Yeah, and that action you've done before is generally tenser than it need be now because you've moved on. Yeah. So we need to come to it as though for the first time, every time. As John once said, you know, Tai Chi is a process of starting at square one. Yeah. So you're starting at the beginning. It's almost like you've never turned before. So it's not habitual. You're not repeating something you've done before. You're doing something that you've never done before. So that's the only way the mind has a chance of changing, of developing, of becoming more quiet. Yes, that's what they mean by letting go and, you know, reducing, yeah. Letting what you know fall away. Because what you know was good yesterday, but it's not anymore. Yeah, so the mind will naturally, when it's quiet, will naturally go to a true center. But when it's not quiet, what we have to do to give a semblance of doing it right, we have to force the mind to congeal around a pulse center. Yeah. So it's just allowing that congealment to sort of evaporate away, which is always going to be problematic. It's always going to make you fall and wobble and get injured. And because it's only when you get rid of that that you sense the true center. Yeah. And so when you're at the true center, is all you can do is look out. If you don't have the true center, is all you can do is look in, yeah, and struggle and complain, yeah. So it's almost like two opposite things. So just let it really sort of feel like, almost like it's slowing down and grinding to a halt. Yes, this is why they go slow in Tai Chi, because it's the only way you can really look at things. Yeah, so the mind looks at things and has insights. It realizes what needs to happen, and those are your insights. They're really valuable, but they need to be worked on. It's not enough just to have an insight. You then need to make it a point of practice. John always used to say, 6 months working on an insight becomes a breakthrough. Yeah. And then it's almost like you've internalized it permanently. It's become part of you. And you just have to learn, what is your way? Yeah. With practice, does that insight get stronger or does it disappear? If it disappears, you just have to be patient. If it gets stronger, it's probably because you're not practicing enough. Okay, so let's just bring it back. Again, just from the min-meng down, you want it relaxed. I mean, obviously above as well, but it's the bit from the min-meng down that's difficult. You know, because the sacrum's holding on and the legs are getting tired, so we want to tense this up to help them, give them some relief. Like John always used to say, the limiting factor is always strengthen the legs. But it's the strength that is only attained by doing this sort of work. It's not the strength that comes from running or cycling or weight training. It's the strength that comes from bending them, not the strength that comes from straightening them. Okay, now let's just try a few backward and forwards. Yeah? Because what we want is this feeling of sinking. Yeah? Yeah. So what we have to avoid is what generally happens, which is the person doing this. They're throwing their hip forward, throwing the hip back like this. Yeah. And so you're coming forwards and the hip is not going forwards. The hip is trying to stay back and sink, which means that this is happening as you come forwards. And then the same thing here. Yeah. So when John used to do it, he'd have quite a short step, wouldn't he, and he'd just be doing this, yeah. And it's almost like his head was staying still, yeah. So it's that sort of feeling, like your head, which is like a representative of your body, doesn't really move that much. It's your weight that moves, yeah. So you don't have to think in terms of, okay, I'm moving my weight backwards and forwards like this, which would be coarse and a bit ignorant. You're just sinking all the time. You're sinking. You're moving forwards by sinking. You're moving back by sinking. Forwards by sinking. Because it's only when you get that your sacrum can remain relatively relaxed and vertical. Otherwise, when you come forwards, you will lean forwards. And when you go back, you will tend to lean back. We do the opposite. When we come forwards, we lean back. And when we go back, we lean forwards, like Chamanching. Yeah? So this is just slotting down into a sunk posture. Remember, it's only 70% in the front foot. Yeah? So when you're in the front foot, you feel double weighted. And this is difficult, yeah? I watch my students struggling with it all the time. They're letting the knee collapse in and they're coming forwards like this. Because you need a certain flexibility in the hips, yeah? And also it sort of just opens the mind in a way that it doesn't when you throw the hips around. So you can see the joint here is open, so that opens something in the mind as well. And then when I go back, so when I go back, I just have to be careful I don't do this, yeah. I sink into the leg, yeah. And it's painful, yeah. So don't think in terms of really advancing, or retreating. You're just doing something that makes the heart and the mind expand upwards. Yeah? So I settle into this leg here, and it's like my heart just opens up like a flower. And the head feels like an expanding balloon. And then I sink back here, and again, this ooh, and this expands. So it's an energetic exercise rather than a physical one, when you do it properly with a view to keeping the sacrum relaxed and vertical. It's difficult to know which leg hurts more, the front or the back. Okay, so again here, just feel what you tend to do. You tend to do this, yeah. Basically using both legs to push, yeah. But what we want is this feeling of really opening the groin, yeah. So if you use the front leg properly, that should turn you. You should be turning around into it, yeah. If you're using the legs wrong, just by pushing ignorantly, then you'll always turn away. As I come forwards, I'll be turning this way and then this way, like this, yeah. But if I really bend the leg and just sink here, it'll pull this hip round. It'll be a natural push, yeah. That's what we want. And then when I go back, it wants to do this, but I have to be careful and just keep the waist square. Otherwise, the energy will go out over there, yeah. So here. Yeah, so just think in terms of yielding into the leg, yeah? So I don't push myself into this leg, because this leg has only got one possibility then. It gets anxious in order to catch the weight. I just let all the joints open here and I draw myself into the foot. Yeah, so I'm melting into the leg that's bending rather than being thrown by the leg that's straightening. So here, whoa. So it's completely different. It's a completely different action, different energy, different philosophy. It's basically the only way you can keep things relaxed, yeah? Especially the sacrum. We want to subject this area to tensile forces, not compressive ones, yeah? So I'm pulling my sacrum. My sacrum doesn't want to move. I pull my sacrum. Yeah? I pull. And I pull. As John would say, you have to fall in love with yielding. Yeah, so for him, yielding was basically, it's the way of dealing with any situation, basically. You melt into it and transform it rather than fight it. Ooh. So concentrate on the yielding hand, yeah? So here I'm yielding. The leg and the arm are yielding. This is a byproduct, yeah? So I'm yielding into the leg. And if I'm yielding into the leg, something must be coming up it, and that just comes into the opposite arm, but it's not so important. So I really yield and melt, yeah? And then, whoa. Okay, so now let's just bring it back. As John used to say, you know, if you touch perfection even for a second during the session, then it's worthwhile. And you know what he meant by perfection was really just the feeling of perfection, the feeling that you're doing it better than you've ever done it before. Yeah. You've understood something, a penny has dropped, yeah, something's clicked. Remember once, you know, we were sitting around on a Sunday and, you know, John, you know, he said to me, "How are you feeling?" You know, whenever he said that, it was always a sign that he picked something up and I wasn't feeling very good. So I said, "Yeah, I'm tired," I said. And I said I was going to just rest this morning instead of practicing, but I'm so glad I practiced because I found out things I would never have found out if I hadn't. And he smiled at me, said, "Ah, the words of the good student." Yeah. So it's the wonderful thing about Tai Chi. You can always just practice how you feel. Yeah. You don't need to go vigorously at it if you're feeling tired. Yeah. But you have to soften and let yourself be drawn in. Yeah. You let yourself get drawn into it. Yeah. Okay, now let's just try the stepping one. So ideally, it's the same thing. It's just much more difficult. It's easier going back than coming forwards, because when we come forwards, we always want to bring too much weight forwards. But to get this down, instead of just pulling it over like this, yeah. The feeling is that the body doesn't want to move. The legs move freely, but the body wants to stay where it is. So the leg has to pull quite hard to get the body to move. And we're so used to pushing with the legs that when we move, we don't even realize it's coming from our own legs. Yeah. So my body's drifting now. It's because this leg is pushing. Yeah. And for me, my body's just almost floating along with a mind of its own. Yeah. But it's all from the legs. So we want the legs to pull, and then this leg pulls, and then this leg pulls. And I don't need to move. If I find my leg pushing me out, it's because it's lazy, because it doesn't want to support the weight. And then I pull here. And you just have to look at it. It's really difficult because it's difficult to be honest when it comes to pain. Yeah. So I really want to make sure it's this leg pulling that draws me forwards. Yeah. Yeah, so you just become a different creature. You stop being a bully. You stop being someone that's throwing their weight around. And you become someone that's sidling, you know, someone that's sneaky and just drawing themselves, using their seductive powers to pull themselves along. Yeah, so here I suck at the ground. And then here I suck at the ground. Yeah, so meditation is just working on the mind rather than the body. Yeah. So if you have a reluctance to sit, then at least try using the Tai Chi to work on the mind. Go slowly, be honest, and just watch what's happening. Okay, let's try just a bit the other one. So again, just I draw myself forwards. So see how difficult it is because we're just so used to throwing our weight around. We're so used to being stupid, yeah? Ooh. Yeah. And be attentive. Notice everything. And just notice if your mind is wandering, it's because your bum has stuck out. If your bum is truly in, then your mind will be quiet. Pull. Okay, now let's just bring it back. Just feel the mind, feel the head wanting to expand like a balloon that's wanting to expand. And then let's just bring it back to attention, but first just turn the foot out here, yeah? And then just sink into the leg to bring the other foot up. And then just straighten the leg, but try not to let the sacrum go back. You won't be able to straighten the leg completely, but as much as is possible. So if you want to remain energetic, so of energy and sensitive to energy, then you have to keep the legs a bit bent. It's like a wall. And just feel the inner smile. Yeah, inside your mouth is smiling, your heart is smiling, and your sacrum is smiling. So a smile is, the corners lifting and expanding across, and the bottom part dropping. So the bottom of the smile is sinking, the corners are rising, but the whole structure is getting bigger